Good afternoon, Justin.
Hey, thank you for the sound check. How you doing? Is that Joe?
Yeah, that's me.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
Good. Gotta give me 1 second as we allow other people to arrive to get my presentation up and rolling here. About 60 seconds or 90 seconds and we'll get going here. Okay. Well, good to see your names up here. Um, I'm not going to bug you to put on your cameras because I'm going to be doing a share here pretty soon anyway. And then you guys are just going to be looking at slides that I put together. When we met last month, I asked, "Hey, what do you guys want to talk about? What scenarios are you not as familiar with as you'd like to be?" And the topic came up: foreclosures, short sales, REOs, and auctions. So, what do those one, two, three, four things embody together? Can you tell me just what they have in common? What is that foreclosure, short sale, REO auction world? What does that embody? What does that mean to you guys? I'm looking for an answer if you don't mind.
Distressed property, probably bank owned.
Yeah, distressed property and the continuum of um, disposition that may come out of distressed home ownership. Basically, the sad thing of somebody might be losing their home here, and how those properties are disposed of by the homeowners and investors throughout that process. So we're going to get into that pipeline of action. So hang tight. I'm going to do a share here and show you some informational material that I organized for you. Just keep in mind, this is a very survey type thing. This is by no means exhaustive. This is a introduction to foreclosures, short sales, REOs, and auctions. Hopefully, it'll just send up a red flag in your head whenever you hear about these things. Can everybody see that presentation and the poor formatting that I have in front of you there?
Yes.
Okay, great. That logo overlapping the title of the presentation. Good. So, uh, our objective today is to understand distressed property pathways, the short sale, the foreclosure. What does REO even stand for?
Little Sam.
Real estate owned. Great. And auction, just the fundamentals, the concepts at play. By no
Where's
means.
Krista?
What's that?
Krista?
She left.
Oh, she wanted to say bye to you, but you
I'm
were
going to
talking.
go ahead and, hey, Mike,
She stood there for like 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but
Mike Rossi, mute. Thanks. Um, REO properties, auctions, what it means to work with the clients, both on the seller and buyer side, and then we'll get into some Q&A. I do have more information on all this stuff, and we can go down that rabbit hole a little bit further if you have specific questions. So what is distress? That's when we have some sort of hardship that is, generally characterized as financial or monetary issues where you can't pay the mortgage, which leads to delinquency. You get too many delinquencies in a row, a couple of months, now you enter that pre-foreclosure pipeline, and then it goes to foreclosure. That may result in auction or REO. Common causes. And I guess you guys have probably heard this story plenty of times. If you've ever dealt with somebody who said, I need to sell this house, I need to sell now. Um, could be caused from, job loss, illness, divorce, tax delinquency, or just lack of interest. Some people just, I don't want this house, make it go away. We've had, as crazy it sounds, as it sounds, we've had that situation as well. Each state, and this is something that I want to impress upon you, a lot of investors, especially in this age of the TikTok agent or the TikTok investor, they see all the glamorous opportunities that are out there about how you can get into real estate investing on a dime. Um, that isn't always accurate. Each state in our nation um, has its own patchwork of regulations and requirements. A lot of them are common, but just because somebody's posting or putting together a reel in California doesn't mean that that same process is viable in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has what they call judicial foreclosure only. In this process, it moves through the court system. So there are things that need to be done along the way to protect the consumer, but also to protect the investor. Um, there are, national guardrails on this, but there's different pathways in different states. You may have heard of a sheriff's sale, and that's the final step in this judicial foreclosure process. And then in Pennsylvania, it's worth noting there's what they call, there's no statutory right of redemption, and we'll talk a little bit about what those things mean as we move on here. So, judicial foreclosure in Pennsylvania, all mortgage foreclosures must go through the Court of Common Pleas. The lender must file a lawsuit to foreclose. They just can't take the house. They have to go through the process. The borrower will receive official notice and opportunity to respond and redeem their loan a million different ways. Um, Plenty of chances up until that foreclosure. Um, and it's amazing to me how many people don't avail themselves of the opportunities and the resources that are out there for them. But this creates a structured, legally controlled process with legally controlled timelines throughout it. In a past life, I did a job. I was a process server. So I used to be knocking on doors and giving people these notices um, because that is one of the statutory guidelines is that proper process or notice must be made to these homeowners so that they don't just show up and the house is no longer theirs. These have to be taped to the door or handed to the homeowner, as well as certified mail. There's plenty of opportunities for people to be aware of what's going on. Um, I don't want to say that I don't feel sorry for people in this situation, but don't necessarily listen if they tell you that they didn't know this was happening and this was a big surprise. This can take many, many months, more likely years for the REO process to conclude. So a public auction is the end resolution to this. That's run by the county sheriff in each of our counties. The lender submits a bid. So the lender has, at this point, filed a lawsuit for the money that they're owed. You know, that's going to be the outstanding mortgage balance, plus additional accrued interest, plus attorney's fees, perhaps. And then the lender is going to say, here's the price that we need to let this property go. They don't actually have to write a check for the $242,000 that's owed on a property, for example, but they can do a credit bid for what they are owed. A third party buyer, however, may bid competitively to, you know, satisfy what is owed on the property. And if that third party bid doesn't come through and it's an unsold property, then that property becomes essentially it's foreclosed upon and it becomes the property of the investor. Who's the investor in this case? Um, that's the bank or the secondary institution who may own that. So what it means to have no right of redemption, you can redeem this property anytime up until that sheriff's sale. But once the sheriff's sale has gone off, it's complete. So PA does not allow borrowers to reclaim a home post sale in mortgage foreclosure, and that's not the case in every state. The one exception to this might be is if those notices that I talked about previously, if that due process wasn't filed or followed to the T, then the party who lost the property may be able to redeem this property post sale. I had a situation like this not long ago. It was a gas station in Lewistown. I had a buyer who wanted to purchase this property and the property had been purchased out of a sheriff's sale by an investor. And they bought this property for $6,900 at sheriff's sale. Um, the it was owned in an LLC, and the one party of the LLC, the one partner, the one member was deceased. The other one was in prison for human trafficking. Um, and this property went to sheriff's sale and they bought it for 6,900 bucks. We were buying it for 200,000. Um, it was deemed by the attorney who was handling or the underwriter for the title company that due process may not have been followed in that case. So they couldn't issue clear title because process had to be served in the case of this sheriff's sale, not on the dead guy, but on his heirs. And there was no record that that had been served. That's how specific and rigid the requirements are for process to be served. And that is the case right here. As you see, the exception, certain tax sales have redemption rules. I don't think this fell under those tax sale redemption rules, but this was the case. So, who are we talking about in these situations? We're talking about these are the parties that are involved. We've got the homeowner, also known as the borrower. We've got the lender or the servicer. So, if that loan has been resold, You're going to be dealing with investors, Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA, um, and then you're going to be dealing with attorneys and asset managers. Those attorneys and asset managers, the further down the pipeline you go towards foreclosure and into REO, the more relevant attorneys and asset managers become. Any questions so far as we go through this really riveting stuff? Okay. So before we get to there, has anybody dealt with a short sale? Somebody chime in. Tell me what you know about short sales. Okay. A short,
Nothing.
nothing. All right, good. I can deal with that. So when we talk about this distressed property pipeline, um, a few slides up here, we were talking about hardship, delinquency, pre-foreclosure, and foreclosure. Um, Short sale is going to come in somewhere between hardship and foreclosure. It can be in this delinquency range. Actually, short sale generally doesn't come before delinquency because you have to prove that hardship. And generally, the bank isn't going to discuss a short sale before it becomes evident. And the delinquency is how you prove that, is the evidence of that hardship. So if you're having a hard time, but you're still making the mortgage payments, the bank's going to say pretty much, I don't think that you do have a hardship if you're still able to make it, or your hardship isn't significant enough for us to consider the short sale. So a short sale is when a property sells for less than the mortgage balance. You're talking the bank into taking short of what they're owed. And, um, banks don't like that. I mean, that is their sole purpose in life is to get what they're owed. So it's no small task to talk them into taking less than what they're owed. That lender must approve of the payoff, and they have a process um, for that approval. It requires a verified hardship, and homeowner cooperation is essential. This is no easy feat. Um, this process is defined by many layers of gatekeepers and processes, lots of red tape. It's kind of like walking through tar. It's really hard. You might feel like you're getting somewhere by talking through the process with an asset manager. You have to have third-party disclosure approvals for you to speak on behalf of the buyer, or I'm sorry, the seller. Um, and just when you think you're getting somewhere, um, you're dealing with a different person within the institution. And that, from my experience over years of dealing with short sales, is almost in every time, every process, every bank. It's just, it's not an easy process. So, how do we prove the short sale or prove the hardship? We have to have letters from the homeowner. We have to have bank statements from the homeowner. We have to have some delinquency on the mortgage, and um, the review period is a minimum of 30 to 120 days. I've seen it take 6 months, so upwards into the 180-day range, just for it to fall apart on the 1 yard line. I don't think most banks accept a BPO. That would be a third-party broker price opinion. It is almost always requires an appraisal to make sure that the bank understands the value of the property that they're dealing with. This has to be have the investor or the bank's approval. And then many times there is a um, third party negotiator involved because most agents don't have the skill set or the time or the patience to deal with this. Usually you're dealing with um, 1 to 3% of the sale price as a payment for that coordination. Usually a minimum of $4,000 or $5,000 to negotiate that by a third party short sale negotiator. So, it is the responsibility of the agent or the third party negotiator to collect a full hardship package. We're talking probably somewhere in the range of 15 to 50 pages of documentation, different forms, a narrative statement from the homeowner slash borrower describing their hardship, why they fell on hard times, what happened, why are they unable to get back on their feet. They have to identify all liens and judgments. This is, bankruptcy junior. So they have to own up to everything, um, and bare their souls to this investor for this investor to say, yeah, we're probably not going to get our money. Why would they even consider a short sale? Well, they don't, in a lot of cases, want to own these properties. Once these properties go vacant, the value plummets. Um, there are some benefits if they do take ownership of the property, but generally they try to find a win-win here. Now, there are forms to be used for PAR forms, basically notification of a short sale. We've been on an upswing in the market for recent memory for quite some time. So short sales have been in the minority. So many of us, it makes sense that we don't have any experience with short sales. If you find out that your seller is upside down, come to me and we'll talk about what forms we have to use, what notifications, what notices we should consider, and what we can do um, to provide for your client in advance. If you have a buyer who's looking at a short sale property, likewise, come to me. I'll make sure that we're watching all the right metrics. And if you do have a listing that is delinquent on their mortgages, we need to be very aware of what dates we're dealing with, because if we don't accomplish a sale, you know, on the open market before the sheriff's sale, your contract's null and void. You don't own the property, and neither does your seller. Um, and you're going to see this property come up as a REO property sometime in the future. So REO properties are, you know, bank-owned properties after an unsuccessful option. And by unsuccessful option, we mean it wasn't purchased by a third party buyer who was willing to pay more um, than what was owed. Now, these properties are often vacant, and whenever they say sold as is, they are very often sold strictly as is. There are some exceptions. There's the home ready ownership program. Some of those, they will come in and they will make investments to the property. While yes, they are REO, they do make an investment so that they can try and maximize the return to the investor. In many cases, that investor is the federal government. So that title typically is cleared prior to resale. That's an important distinction to make as we get down to talk more about auctions and how that's not the case. So, has anyone had to make an offer on any third-party portals like Hubzu or something like those?
Yes, I've made a couple.
And what's been your experience with those, Jeff?
Um, they're a pain. Um, they ask for minimal documentation and they never guarantee, even if you win the deal, you're going to get the deal.
Right. That's what we call the golden rule. Those with the gold make the rules, and there's no, as you said, guarantee. All the penalties are on the buyer side. There's no penalty on their side as the seller. Um, they use their own contracts, their own addendums that supersede our contracts. They have their own process, their own timelines, and they will charge you if you were late to get to the closing table. If you are the cause of it, if they're the cause of that delay, which is very, very common in a foreclosure REO situation, um, then you just kind of have to hang out. Even if that means that your rate lock, um, extension costs your buyer money, that's on your buyer, that's not on them. Everything is heavily waived and disclaimed to protect the investor, in this case, sometimes the federal government. So, um, it's important to understand that each bank has its own process, its own contracts, and many times their own portal. And if you find this um, interesting, you may go to each one of these portals. You just Google or ask ChatGPT for a list of REO investors and portals, and you can go in and actually take training on each one of these different portal platform structures. And once you get that certification, then you're starting to build yourself an REO listing resume. And you can actually send that resume out to property managers. Um, and those are area based, depending on your zip code, and say, hey, I'm qualified. Here's my certification for the pyramid portal or whatever portal you might be dealing with, Hubzu portal, the HUD portal, and you may have the opportunity to list properties for these investors as they repossess these homes. I've had agents working for me do that in the past. So, REO characteristics, limited repairs offered, very limited. When you submit an offer, how about it, Jeff? They're looking for simplicity. They want as few question marks as possible. If there's a cash offer, they're going to take it, unless it's one of these government-backed programs where they have a requirement under Congress to offer it first to homeowners. Um, Sometimes the buyer must activate the activity or activate the utilities in order to do their home inspection or the appraisal. And sometimes they take their time in responding to you. And typically, I've never seen real restrictions on inspections, but it is a possibility. The disclosures for sure are absolutely limited. They are not going to own up to anything that they don't know. Sometimes they will do a pre inspection, but like I said, there's as many different investors and processes out there in this world as there are lenders, which are like grains of sand on the beach. So, REO buyer challenges, unknown conditions, financing limitations, often because of those conditions. The repair needs may be extensive, um, and those strict deadlines, and as I mentioned before, penalties which coincide with those strict deadlines on the buyer side. If they miss a deadline, that's to be expected. If you miss a deadline, you're going to be paying, in most cases, I think it's $100 a day per diem for getting to the settlement table late. So sheriff sales and tax sales often are used interchangeably. We just say sheriff sale, but there are differences. A sheriff sale is a mortgage foreclosure, a tax sale, um, is going to be at the courthouse for money that was owed to the local taxing authority. Um, in my experience, that may be where the bargains lay, on those tax sales, because they usually don't get past 3 years of delinquency before they hit the tax sales. On a sheriff sale, you know, they might have gone into foreclosure a year into owning the property and they still owe $250,000 on the property. But on a tax sale, say they owe $10,000 a year and they're 3 years in arrears, you may be able to pick up that property for $30,000. The important thing to note on these auctions, the only lien that's being satisfied is the one that caused it to be auctioned. Has anyone had any experience with this? Any investor stories out there? Because I've heard some nightmares. A lot of these have to do with, a property gets picked up at tax sale for $30,000 to pay off, 3 years of tax judgments. But there's a mortgage out there floating around. That investor who went to the tax sale thinks they're getting a steal for $30,000, finds out that there's a $100,000 reverse mortgage laying, out there that they didn't know about on this property. That tax sale doesn't satisfy any other liens. On top of that, you could have $1,000 in trash, water, and sewer bills. You could have HOA fees that had accrued and not been satisfied. So just because the price tag that you got it for at the tax sale seems like it's too good to be true, it may be too good to be true. If you are representing somebody and they express interest in this, you need to make them aware that this is a minefield, and they should do everything they can to learn about that property, including spending the money on a title search, even though they may not get the property. That $150 or $300 that they spend for a title search may save them $100,000 in unexpected liens. So I would make that advice right there. Also, if you got a sheriff's sale or a tax sale, your buyers will likely not have access to the interior of the property. So they're doing a walk around the outside. You better not advise them to break into the house to know what's inside. But I know that a lot of people take that opportunity because these houses a lot of times are vacant. A lot of times they may have squatters. Some of the online platforms that you will see are auction.com, Hubzu, however you pronounce that one. Unknown condition, absolutely pervasive when you're dealing with distressed auctions. Somebody's taken the house. I've seen them take the cabinets with them. I've seen them take the plumbing with them. I've seen them strip the wires out of the walls because they were getting every cent out of that property they could. Sometimes you may have squatters. You may have to get the old homeowner out of that property, and they are not going to be very pleasant to deal with because they no longer own this home. Sometimes when you're dealing with auctions, most of the time when you're dealing with auctions, your deposits are non-refundable and they are as is as it gets. These auctions are many times as is. If you want to do an inspection on a property, you may have to do that before the auction. So if you're buying an auction and you want to inspect the septic, you may have to do that on spec. You do the meaning that you're paying for that inspection, just like that title search, and you don't even know if you're getting the property. And then the financing challenges that go along with a potential squatter, unknown condition that you should probably assume is bad. Assume that there's, water damage because of frozen pipes. If somebody's being thrown out of the house, they're leaving, and they're probably not going to drain down the water lines before heating season, and now the property is not being handled appropriately. HUD Home Store is one of the really common ones that we deal with. There had been a moratorium for a couple of years during the recent recession where they were trying to, following COVID, they wanted to limit people being thrown out of their houses. So there was actually a moratorium for some time. Um, they are filtering in through the process now. HUD Home Store has become more prevalent again, and you'll see some of these sealed bid situations on the HUD Home Store. These are foreclosures, many of them significantly distressed condition wise. So while we're talking about auctions, and a lot of agents don't recognize that there are non-distressed auctions. What's the difference between a non-distressed auction and a distressed auction? These are very common in rural markets for land or farms, large commercial assets that they're trying to liquidate quickly. And in areas where there's a strong auction culture, Tavia, you've had relationships with auctioneers in the past, as have I. Um, and these can be used strategically to great effect. Sometimes they are, very effective. Sometimes they are not. Just depends on who shows up to the auction that day. And they're designed to create competitive bidding. And if the right two people show up and get auction fever, I've seen properties sell far above what I would have expected them to bring, uh, on a normal real estate market. My aunt's house, for example, I would have thought that it would sell for 325,000. The right people showed up and it sold for 360. Doesn't mean that happens every time. They got a tailwind. I've had other properties, that I would expect to put on the market for 4.25. Highest bid was 275 because the people that showed up were bargain hunters. I think a lot of that has to do with exposure and marketing of the property. Um, you need a high exposure campaign to advertise those. You need to have that competitive bidding environment, as I just described. There are generally limited contingencies, and the one benefit that I see is that you have a predictable sale timeline. You can set the terms at the time of auction, saying that this must be closed in 45 days. You have a little bit less control whenever it goes on the open market. Am I right? If you are representing a buyer in any auction or any of these REO situations, or any auction, distressed or non-distressed, you're going to need to provide proof of funds. Buyer premiums are common, and there are many structures for auctions. In some cases, the sellers pay the premium to the auctioneer. In some cases, the buyer pays the premium to the auctioneer. In some cases, both buyer and seller are paying the auctioneer. Many times those deposits are non-refundable and non-negotiable. They tell you exactly how much that deposit must be. 10% of the sale price in collected funds, meaning cashier's check, on the day of sale, on the day of the auction. And then the remainder of it in 45 days. They don't care how you get it. They just, if you don't get it, you don't get your deposit back, 10%. And then you must complete your due diligence early. And by early, I mean prior to the auction in most cases. So what's your role as the agent? You have to explain the reserve versus a non-reserve. Non-reserve means this property will sell today. And you'll hear that a lot of times as the auctioneer kicks the sale off, whether or not they have to say whether there's a reserve or no reserve. And if there's no reserve, they're going to make sure that everyone knows this property will be sold today. If there is a reserve, generally, they're going to stop partway through and tell you whether that reserve was hit or not. Your job is to coordinate showings and to help register your bidder prior to the sale. If you don't register your bidder prior to that live auction, you are probably not going to get any compensation out of that auctioneer, even if it's being offered. You need to do that correctly. And you need to make sure that everybody knows what role you are playing. Are you a buyer's agent? Are you just getting a referral from the auctioneer from registering your people? If you find yourself in a auction situation, give me a call and we can figure that out. As is really means as is on these auctions. Inspection limitations are common, as we discussed. Delays should be expected. I'm sorry, I was a little mixed up on my slides here. I'm going back to this one. We're done with auctions now. We're going back to the foreclosure and short sale timeline for all parties. So this is no longer auctions. We're now back talking about this whole pipeline for distressed properties. When you're working with buyers, representing your buyer in a short sale, in a foreclosure, meaning REO, in a HUD property, on any of these distressed properties, you need to set the expectation that as is means as is. If there's a dead cat in the basement, that's included. Okay? That's how as is I want you to think of this. Inspection limitations are very common. And by that I mean the utilities may or may not be on. There may not be a gas meter. Okay? If there's not a gas meter, if there's not a water meter, how are you going to be able to check the plumbing or make sure the furnace works? Those delays should be expected because a lot of times these investors, they haven't done their due diligence on this property until they get a contract. And now you're the one paying for this title search. Your title search turns up an old reverse mortgage. They don't start trying to clear that old reverse mortgage until your people turn it up because they don't want to pay for all of that due diligence in advance. Okay? These are the reasons that they try to incentivize you to use their title company because they may have the flexibility to satisfy requirements less than best practices would tell us to do. That's why I encourage you to get your buyers, if possible, to sidestep those incentives, to use their title company of choice. Do I want you to use our title company? Yeah, that'd be great. But I don't care if you do, as long as you're not using the title company that is representing that investor, because they are not working for your client. They don't have the best interest of your client at heart. And while they're not going to do anything illegal, they're not going to go to the end of the earth to make sure that your people are best represented. Okay. And keep in mind, if you're trying to buy one of these FHA or VA, you've got a mighty tall hill to climb there. If you have the opportunity to list one of these, be very careful. Make sure that everything is accurate, clearly written disclosures. Make sure that you're using proper addenda. Document, document, document. That includes short sales. That includes if you find yourself in an opportunity to work with an auctioneer, any of these things that are outside the norm, give me a call and I'll make sure that you're taking the right steps to protect yourself and us. And above all, avoid giving your clients legal advice, especially in these situations that are, as I described before, landmines or minefields. Give me a second. Just check my notes here. So, setting expectations is so important. We talk about this a lot. How are your clients? How to keep your clients from becoming upset, frustrated, whatever. You need to set these expectations up front. You need to tell them, not that distress transactions may take longer. They do take longer. And I mean, do they take longer every time? Not always, but delays are more common in distressed sales than in any other. And the fall throughs are much more common. We had one up in Williamsport not too long ago. I mean, they found out that the gas meter and the water meter weren't hooked up, and they couldn't check the furnace or any of the plumbing. And the bank in that REO situation still tried to keep the earnest money deposit. And it's very tough because the buyer at the time was very motivated and they really meant it whenever they filled out the contract and said, as is, no inspections. But when we came down the home stretch and found out that they couldn't get the utilities on, then they try to back out of the deal. So you need to make sure that you people know what they're doing whenever they go into these situations, because you're not dealing with people, you're dealing with sharks, you're dealing with institutions that have a responsibility to their stockholders. So those distress transactions take longer. They are more prone to fall throughs. You need to communicate with the people involved, and communication on these is often um, very technical, and it's also um, emotionless, where urgency is something that we deal with every day, and emotion on the part of home buyers and sellers. No matter how bad you want to talk to these people, you may be stuck communicating through a portal or via email. You may not be able to get anyone to pick up a phone. So you have to build those communication turnaround buffers into your process and make sure that your client understands that I'm not going to be able to get you an offer or an answer to your offer or to your question or your concern right away if I was dealing with, Jeff Selby down the street as a local real estate practitioner. I'm going to have to deal with um, somebody who is a gatekeeper. I'm going to have to send them an email, and I may not hear back for 2 or 3 days. If it's a Friday, I may not be hearing back till Monday or Tuesday. So your buyers must remain flexible throughout that process. They must understand what's going on. I represented my client, who was my cousin, in the purchase of a REO property. He was very anxious to buy this property, but he lost some of his enthusiasm when it closed 3 months after what the proposed closing date initially was. And the sellers, they must also understand market reality. If they are in a short sale situation or they are under duress and they are in a distressed situation, people can smell blood in the water. So they must understand the market reality. They need 200 to come out of this sale whole. They need to be realistic that they may not get that 200, and they may have to go lower to accomplish the sale before they lose everything. So, key takeaways: distressed deals require expertise. You have to be very careful with those. And I just want this to, stick in your brain as a red flag. If something doesn't sit right, if this is not a normal deal, raise your hand, ask for help, and get an extra set of eyes on that deal. Auctions provide opportunities, both in distress and out of distress. Make sure that we are filling out all the right paperwork in these situations because it protects you as well as your buyers and your sellers. And that your knowledge of this process drives client confidence. So if somebody's asking you about a property, it seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Read those listing notes and it says this is an auction. Okay, great. Dig deeper, call for information on that, or call me and I'll tell you how to find the information on that. Same thing as if it's a distressed property. And if somebody's calling you and says, hey, what do you know about sheriff sales? You probably can't help them navigate the sheriff sale process. Okay? What do you got, guys? What questions do you have on this stuff for me? Nothing?
Nothing for me.
All right.
Justin, I got something.
What do you got?
So I did one foreclosure before, and I was trying to think of the loan type, and I for the life of me I can't think of it. But they wanted to accept regular conventional financing. We had to go to a local bank, I believe Traditions, because they did an in-house loan. I think it was for some reason I think it was called an unsecured loan. And is that similar? Is that like common with a lot of these foreclosures? Because like
Sure.
buy lender couldn't do it. Regular.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
good question. A lot of these are let me stop the share. So to get my head around this and help you get your head around it, what's the continuum of financing? Cash is king, right?
Yeah.
And then conventional. Why conventional? Because the appraisal is only concerned about making sure that the conditions there to secure the collateral or secure the as collateral to secure the loan. And then you have FHA, VA, all the government underwritten loans. The government underwritten loans aren't going to cover anything with bad condition. I'm assuming that this foreclosure had bad enough condition that even a conventional loan wasn't going to swing it. And that's why they wanted an unsecured loan, or what they often called, or a portfolio loan,
Yes, that's it.
right? A portfolio loan means that the bank keeps that in their portfolio of investments. It doesn't get packaged for resale to the secondary market, Fannie Mae, uh, Freddie Mac, all that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you're dealing in your day-to-day real estate lives and someone says the underwriter said this, the underwriter said that, we need this. Um, those underwriters are making sure that that loan package fits into a neat box and they
Mm-hmm.
can sell that loan on the secondary market. and they get their money back, and then they can sell that money again, package it up and sell that on the secondary market. A portfolio loan doesn't get sold on the secondary market, so there's no real rules to it. So you don't have to worry about underwriter approval. And that's why a lot of these are going to say portfolio only, because it's
That
basic,
makes sense.
you know, it's much more permissive than a conventional loan.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yep. Anybody else? Well, thanks for tuning in. I hope that these red flags stick in your brain. And if you see something that is a little bit outside the normal, that you will raise your hand, call somebody, and get some more information. So have a great one. And we'll tune in January for our next contracts and scenarios. Merry
Thank you,
Christmas.
Justin.
Bye
Thank
now.
you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.